Okay, before we start, Nafeez, what's common to you isn't common to everyone else. Why did you call them the Alt-Reich? How do you define it?
So the Alt-Reich, obviously, we recognize the term Third Reich. It's about Nazis. That was the Nazi reign. And then there's that term, the other term we know, the alt-right, the alternative right, which is a word that actually came from a neo-Nazi, Richard Spencer, who was trying to figure out how to repackage Nazis, not their neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-everything ideas, and they were like, "Well, we should change ourselves from people call us the far right. No, no, no. We should call ourselves the alternative right." And Steve Bannon was really excited by this, and he agreed with this, and he took it and he ran with it, and it then became the alt right. And so
Mm.
what I've said is, well, actually, when we know that one of the driving ideologies here is actually a sympathy with Nazi ideology, and in fact, many of the groups that I've been studying over the last decade or so have been are not just adjacent to Nazi ideology, but actually believe really strongly in some of the most insidious biological racist theories that were instrumental in Nazi ideas and have now repackaged them in new ways. So I thought the best way of understanding this is actually this term alt-right, which
Mm.
takes this idea that they've used, alt-right, and says, actually, no, these guys are very much rooted in those traditional fascist ideas. But what we're seeing is a transformation, in the postmodern world. We're seeing that these guys are tactically shifting and maneuvering so that they can conceal their Nazi identities and their white supremacist ideologies in a new context, which is basically a world which hates Nazis. So after the Second World War, no one was going around jumping around. Obviously, some people were, but it wasn't fashionable anymore to go around saying, "I love Nazis, I hate Jews." Suddenly, it was like, "Oh,
I'm
we
old
won the
enough,
war."
Nafeez, to remember that Indiana Jones used to beat them up and we used to applaud in the theater.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it wasn't. It was a completely different era. So these guys had to tactically shift, and as a result, what you've seen is a very new and peculiar form of fascism. So just think, the days of Mussolini and Hitler, where you would be a card-carrying fascist and you would proudly say, I'm a fascist and all of that stuff. Those days have now gone. Now we've had to kind of change. So what you're finding the same groups are now actually masquerading as the opposite. So in order to push forward these ideas, they're actually saying we are anti-Nazi, we are anti-racist. We're not racist, we're not Nazis, but it's somehow repackaging their ideas. And that has led to this really strange situation where many groups are adopting different ideologies, different ways to essentially promote the same core set of ideas, which is that there is a biological hierarchy, and they
Mm.
believe that there are ultimately different races, and some are better than others, and essentially white people are at the top. Everybody else is at the bottom, and maybe we can have a debate about who's at the bottom. Is it black people? Is it brown people? Is it Jews? We're not sure where they sit on that hierarchy, but we know that the white people are at the top.
And also, this is just news. Just a couple of days ago, nope, yesterday on Tuesday, the Boston Globe revealed that the Justice Department lawyer pushing Donald Trump's war against Harvard University for alleged complicity in anti-Semitism once wrote a college paper from the perspective of Adolf Hitler, as one does. Like that. Remember that episode from Succession, where they realize one of their anchors like really loves Hitler. I don't know if you saw that scene. It was hilarious. He goes, "Oh, just we want to get on top of this, you know. So yeah, your dog's name." He goes, "Yeah, it just happens to be, it was Hitler's dog's name, right?" Like, "Oh, and you read Mein Kampf? Yeah, several times." He goes, "Several times." It's like there's like a slow awareness happening in the United States, Nafeez, that many of these people might really actually like Hitler's ideas. And another example, top of my head, the man who was the unqualified white man chosen to replace Dr. McCanterfer, the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because Donald Trump didn't like the job numbers that revealed that his economy is terrible. E.J. Antoni, unqualified, participated in the January 6th insurrection. And I don't know if you heard, Nafeez, his Zoom background features Hitler's favorite ship, totally normal.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
wow. I mean, that's what we're up against. And I think what people at the moment, so the mindset is that these are just strange incidents or accidents, or oh, it's one guy, or oh, it's another guy, or oh, it's another guy. And I think when you start looking at the pattern, you realize that this is not an accident.
there you go.
And I don't want to go down the garden path of suggesting everyone's a Nazi, and that's what we always get told, right? When we start calling out fascism for what it is, it's, oh, you think that all Republicans are Nazis. That is not what this is about. Of course, the vast majority of people who are voting for Trump are not Nazis. They
No,
don't believe in Nazism at all. But the reality is that the Trump administration and the driving interests and influences and moneymakers behind the administration, including people who are increasingly being appointed to these different posts, they are people who have been influenced by this ideology, which is Nazi adjacent. And just to give a really just look at what Trump's been saying recently, just to justify his unlawful deployment of National Guard. He's been saying there's criminals everywhere, and there are people who are born criminals. So think
there
about
you
the
go.
language that he's using. People are born criminals, and that's just what they like, and it's a real problem. We have to do something. Is this just an accident? It's not the first time he said stuff like this. Just a couple of years ago, he was talking about how, you know, people, we have to look at humans in the same way we look at horse breeding. Some types are better than others. And he's used these analogies in the past. Why? Why is he using this idea that someone could be born a criminal? This is an idea which is completely antithetical to the American Constitution, the American spirit, which is that everybody is actually ultimately equal. And what is it that the American Constitution was fundamentally all about? No one is born a criminal. But if you think that there are people who are born criminals, what does that say about you? It says that there is a hierarchy. There are some people that need to just be crushed. And where does that come from? It comes from these eugenics ideas. So one of the things that
I'm so glad, Nafeez, before you continue, and I will let you continue, of course. I'm so glad because I also mentioned it yesterday. I was a masochist. I saw the press conference in real time, and I did a couple of tweets and posts about it. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He literally said fellow Americans are born criminals. What? A criminal calling other people criminals. But not only that, he looked at the blue states, and specifically, he was talking about the black population in these blue cities, saying that they were born criminals. So I'm just really happy. I just appreciate that you call that out because I saw that as one of the big whoppers that just got ignored because his racism is always ignored because Nafeez, he just had a racial trip up. It's economic anxiety. But continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the thing, is that we're starting to see that this sort of language is becoming normalized, and it's becoming more obvious, but it's also becoming more part of what the administration is doing. I mean, you can start to see glimpses of it when you look closer at specific things. Like, look at the executive orders that have come out in relation to the war on the Smithsonian Institute, right? And they're talking about, on the one hand, there's this flowery language about, oh, protecting history. And then when you just probe a little deeper, this is not about protecting history at all. The history is there. These guys do not want criticisms of slavery. They don't want criticisms and recognition of white supremacist ideology. And what was really astonishing when you look at that, some of the executive orders that came out in the last few months, is they specifically mention this idea that there are criticisms of the idea of scientific racism, and they actually refer quite explicitly to the way in which this is criticized. And so you're starting to see that before they were hiding the ball, and now they're beginning to show the real face.
There
And
you
this
go.
is becoming more clear in certain ways. But again, you have to go a bit deeper, go behind. What is the hatred of DEI really about? What is that? Where is that really coming from? And so, just to trace this back a little bit, who are the biggest voices that we're seeing? Who are talking about DEI? We've got people like Richard Hanania. Um, you know,
Who,
you know,
who allegedly is reformed, Nafeez. He says he's
reformed.
reformed.
Yeah, yeah. And you got these other guys, right? And so I went and looked at these major kind of American right wing icons who have been fighting this war on DEI. And one of them, there was the famous guy. His name is dropped off my head right now. I've obviously blanked it out from trauma. But one of these guys, he was actually flown to in the first administration. They flew him out to the White House to help write the law that was going to basically start dismantling the DEI legislations. This was how kind of incestuous it was. But both of these guys, I did a story investigating these guys. Both of these guys were inspired by a book called The Bell Curve. This
Mm.
book came out in the 1990s. It was authored by a guy that everyone should know. His name is Charles Murray.
Yep.
Now, Charles Murray is not someone who is in the public limelight, but he wrote this book,
Well,
and
was
this
it
book,
Christopher Rufo? You're talking about
Christopher
Rufo,
Rufo, that's it, Christopher Rufo.
who's now
Christopher Rufo is the other
mainstream
guy.
and was given. New York Times has invited him to write a column, and apparently, New York Times didn't want to get scooped by Rufo, which is why they released that shitty article a couple of months ago. That Rufo now is as mainstream as it gets. Continue,
Which is
Nafeez.
extraordinary, right? So Christopher Rufo, Richard Hanania, both of them working together as well. Um, Both of these guys, they've both essentially been outed now. I mean, it's public record knowledge that Christopher Rufo was did various interviews and was affiliated with an organization called the Aporia magazine. Aporia magazine is a race science magazine that basically was literally a direct effort to rehabilitate an actual race science publication called Mankind Quarterly that was published by a Nazi foundation originally called the Pioneer Fund that was set up in 1937. And this effort was done recently, and they kind of rebranded themselves, and now the Pioneer Fund was rebranded and called the Human Biodiversity Foundation. And then they published Aporia magazine as a kind of, sensible scientific kind of publication. And eventually there were a number of stories that basically revealed, and there was a major British charity investigation organization called Hope Not Hate, which has been fighting fascists for decades. They basically did an undercover investigation where they revealed this entire nexus and exposed this magazine. And Christopher Rufo was right there with these guys, talking to them, linked with them. And Richard Hanania, similarly, I uncovered several articles where he was quoting directly the work of Charles Murray, several other people linked to the Pioneer Fund. And to be really clear, what Charles Murray did with his book, The Bell Curve, is essentially took research that was financed by this Nazi foundation in the 60s and 70s in order to launder scientific racist Nazi ideas. This is basically the idea that there are these biological hierarchies. White people are at the top, black people are at the bottom. At that time, Jews were seen as beyond the pale, but they've shapeshifted it, and some of these racists will say that Ashkenazi Jews are superior in intelligence. So they can shapeshift however they want to in order to suit the times. But the essential structure of this ideology was the same. And Charles Murray rehabilitated this whole idea, repackaged it, excised the Nazi anti-Semitic origins of it quite deliberately from the book, and made it mainstream. And so you've got these two guys vibing off this kind of bell curve ideology and then laundering it into the mainstream. And what are they doing? They're saying, oh, DEI is the problem. So now we're starting to realize that actually this hatred of diversity and equality and inclusion is literally inspired by people who are laundering Nazi ideology into the mainstream. That's
Yep.
what we're dealing with. And so, what we're seeing, the reason the Republican Party has become increasingly radicalized in this way, and we've all seen it, right? Like, even compared to 2016, where we had some more dissent in the party, we had some more people speaking up. There's been a concerted effort to close off that dissent because this broligarchy are inspired by the same ideas. Well, what they've done is they've taken it in this kind of technological utopian direction where they've married it with ideas about AI and the future of humanity, really strange, dangerous ideas. and they want to re-engineer societies because they think that democracy is the fundamental threat to maintaining this biological hierarchy. That's the way they see it. So for them, the Trump administration is kind of like their last hurrah. It's their wild card. It's the last chance to prevent democracy from essentially allowing hordes of rabid brown and black people from taking over the world.
But we're going to get to the broligarchy and how their hands are all over it, folks. I want to remind folks before we get into that Peter Thiel bankrolled J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance follows Curtis Yarvin, that techno-fascist philosopher who says democracy is incompatible with capitalism. Peter Thiel agrees with that. Andreessen agrees with that. Musk agrees with that. And J.D. Vance, the vice president, follows this crank, right? J.D. Vance met with AfD, the Alternative for Germany, still has a pro-Nazi roots, right? Despite people saying, "Hey, aren't they anti-Semitic and haters?" He still met with them, right? We've seen them meeting with the Reform UK movement, right? The Brexit folks. We've seen them also be chummy with Geert Wilders of Netherlands, right? The far right part of the Le Pen's party. Also, her father was what? An anti-Semite and what? Holocaust denier. Oh yeah, it all. Anyone who's been watching the show, Nafeez, I've been saying it for years, and people think we're crazy. People think people of color are always crazy. White supremacy, eugenics, race science. It goes back to white supremacy. People are like, you're always talking about race. And I made this prediction, Nafeez. This is the world's worst. I told you so. I get no joy. I said a couple years ago, by late 2024, 2025, Nafeez, white supremacist talking points would be mainstream in the Republican Party. Folks, yesterday, very few people covered it. This is Republican Senator Eric Schmidt. Before I give you his quote, let me read to you the manifesto, Nafeez, you know this, of the neo-fascist group Patriot Front. Oh, the Nazi lovers with masks who've been marching in streets after Donald Trump was elected. This is from their manifesto. Wait for it. Quote, "To be an American is to be a descendant of conquerors, pioneers, visionaries, and explorers. This unique identity was given to us by our ancestors, and this national spirit remains firmly rooted in our blood." Manifesto from the neo-fascist group Patriot Front. Okay, this is Eric Schmidt yesterday, Nafeez. I don't know if you saw this.
I missed this.
Quote, "We're a nation of settlers, explorers, and pioneers, born on the ocean waters that carried the first ships to our shores and forged in the crucible of a wild frontier. Our people tamed a continent, built a civilization from the wilderness, and wrote our nation's name in history. Our ancestors were driven here by destiny, possessed by urgent and fiery conviction, by burning belief, devoted to their cause and God. America in all its glory is their gift to us, handed down across the generation. It belongs to us. It's our birthright, our heritage, our
I
destiny."
can't hear you. The mic, has the mic gone?
Can you hear me? Hello, hello? You got me? I can hear you.
Let's come back. Yeah.
All right. America in all its glory is their gift to us, handed down across the generation. It belongs to us. It's our birthright, our heritage, our destiny.
It's insane. And I think this is what we're starting to see, is that there is a direct thread. And you mentioned Curtis Yarvin, and Curtis Yarvin is a really um, he is a very useful character in understanding this story. So here's this guy, this obscure incel type tech bro dude, who clearly has no real life, but ends up getting some investment from Peter Thiel. He's like a programmer guy, and gets some investment for this small company that he's doing. And it turns out that he's actually been writing this blog anonymously for a while. And eventually he says, "That's me. I wrote that blog." Mencius Moldbug is the name of the blog. And so I went back and really had a dig deep into some of the things that he wrote in that blog. And there's been a lot of focus, rightly so, on the fact that Curtis Yarvin has had this outsized influence on the administration. As you uh, absolutely pointed out, he influenced J.D. Vance. Peter Thiel's read him, Elon Musk has read him, all of these tech bros, Mark Andreessen, all of these guys have read him. There are several people in the administration who have loved Curtis Yarvin, spoken about him. And so there's been a focus, even in the mainstream press, on, oh, Curtis Yarvin was talking about monarchism and was talking about this idea of basically literally ending democracy. And he was talking about the idea of, um, he came up with this acronym RAGE, retire all government employees. He came up with that. So it's amazing. Trump is following this guy's playbook to the letter. What's going on? But one of the things that hasn't really surfaced so much is the fact that Curtis Yarvin is an out and out anti-black racist to a deep, deep extent. And I uncovered, and I'm the only journalist to have done this, despite so many journalists going and talking about Curtis Yarvin and reading about Curtis Yarvin. I'm the only journalist that's written about these 2, 3 articles that he wrote over a decade ago, nearly 2 decades ago. I think it was 2008 or something like that. He wrote these articles. And in these articles, he wrote very specifically and used the N word.
Mm.
And he talked about, and I'm going to say, so he talked about the Negro problem of America.
Wow.
And very candidly described what he described as this trajectory of when, and it basically continues to use the N word throughout the entire piece and talks about how under slavery, so-called Negroes were actually doing okay, you know, and after slavery, everything went downhill. This is
Mm.
essentially the argument that he makes. It's
Mm.
absolutely astonishing, and he's really outed there that this is where he's coming from. And not only that, in several other pieces, he then goes deeper into the origin. Where does this crazy idea come from? He refers to the biological hierarchies, and he talks about the idea that there are essentially ungovernable races. And he describes, again, using the N word again, as people who are fundamentally ungovernable. And then it gets really interesting where he starts using these coded language to describe different races, right? And it's a very bizarre, it's honestly, it's utterly, utterly bizarre. But he uses this coded language. He refers to one group as he refers to the white race with a certain strange, obscure word. He refers to black race with another word. He refers to other colored races as, for instance, swarthy people. It's very strange. And I've written about it in an article for Byline Times. If you Google Nafeez Ahmed, Curtis Yarvin, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. But basically, having labeled all of these groups, he then basically says that he believes there's a fundamental existential threat to the white race, and it's coming from essentially the majority world. And he
There you go.
basically says it
Yep.
blatantly, but under the coded language. But when you translate that coded language, he's literally saying that there is a threat to the white race. It's coming from the global majority, who are largely people of color. And he says the fundamental mechanism through which that threat is going is democracy. Democracy is giving power to these ungovernable masses. We need to do something about it. And that is the origin of where he starts talking about why do we need technological authoritarianism. And then he has this, obviously articulates this frightening vision Gil Duran has referred to it, and you've had him on your show, the idea of, and then it's been taken up in Silicon Valley, the idea of network states. But he essentially
Yep.
refers to it as this patchwork of new kind of sovereign territories where we essentially eliminate national borders. We have this patchwork of territories that are owned and controlled by corporations and governed like Apple and run like monarchies and without any regard for the residents' opinions. And that's to paraphrase him. And and it gets very, very alarming. Like that, he's talked about the idea of there being useless people, and that maybe some of these unproductive, useless people should just be plugged into like a virtual reality type thing, where they
Soylent Green.
yes, exactly, like a Soylent Green, and they'll no longer be of any kind of harm to society. It's an absolutely astonishing techno-fascist vision, and when you bring together all of the different things that he said, you begin to realize that the fact that there are people in the Trump administration who have funded the Trump administration who love this guy to bits is deeply terrifying, because it means that they are moving towards a very concrete, deliberate vision of rapidly dismantling democracy, rewiring the economy into a monarchical, autocratic type patchwork of regimes which are owned and controlled by these by a subsection of white people, essentially, who are essentially the tech bros. And it's a really it's a very dangerous vision. And what's happening right now is they're weaponizing race so that we are fighting amongst ourselves. Let's fight amongst ourselves about Mexicans and Spanish and Muslims and immigrants and asylum seekers, and society's getting deranged about this stuff. But meanwhile, we're not looking at the real enemy. We have one clear common enemy, which is this astonishingly alarming vision, which wants to dismantle democracy beneath our feet. We need to really unite across ethnicities, across nationalities, and across political ideology, because this is something which is dangerous to both the left and the right. There is nothing conservative or even meaningfully Republican about what these guys want to do. This is against what Democrats want, and it's actually against what authentic Republican Party once stood for. So we need to really surface the idea. This is not something this is not a bipartisan issue. This is fundamentally a war on democracy itself.
And furthermore, I want to remind people who are joining us, the nearly 800 people. I'm talking to Nafeez Ahmed about his. When this book first came out, the Alt-Reich, we first had him on. It's just gotten worse, folks. And now we're seeing the plan in fruition. Curtis Yarvin, in particular, is this crank racist techno-fascist who is the guru. I'm not making that word up. I'm not just exaggerating. Peter Thiel, the billionaire, who has his fingers all over the Trump administration, who's the man who groomed J.D. Vance. One of the people who follows Curtis Yarvin, J.D. Vance, the next vice president, the person who groomed J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, who has a $1 billion deal with Palantir to create a surveillance state. Another person who is influenced by these ideas, Elon Musk, who's talked about non-productive people, right? Another person, billionaire Mark Andreessen. People are against DEI. People are against trans folks. People are against immigrants. People are against Muslims. Also tied into this, and what we've talked about often on the left hook, is eugenics. This eugenics worldview that's not just all white people, the best white people, the Ubermenschens are the ones who should be elevated. And what Elon Musk and all these other people believe is that the best white people from their lineage should rule. And guess what, folks? For all their money and all their wealth, they don't care about saving this planet. The reason why they're invested in travel is they think the planet's cooked. So they're going to invest in space travel and then repopulate humanity with the creme de la creme from their genes, where white people from their genes will be on top, and they will repopulate the human species through space terraforming, and they will live forever through techno-humanism by fusing themselves with AI and robotics. Do you think I'm saying bullshit? Nafeez, tell them I'm not crazy.
Absolutely, it's not bullshit. It's exactly what these guys have been thinking about. And so here's a guy who's at the fulcrum of this, a fellow called Nick Bostrom. He is a former Oxford philosopher, and he used to be quite distinguished. He was kind of known for talking about philosophizing about the future. He spoke about AI. He spoke about all this different stuff. Um, and he was head of something called the Future of Humanity Institute, which received funding from Elon Musk. And Elon Musk praised several of his books and all of this stuff. So we look a little bit deeper into who Nick Bostrom is and what is his actual philosophy. He's one of the founding doyens of this idea called long-termism. Now, long-termism, on its face, sounds like it might make sense. Let's have long-term thinking. Let's think about the very long-term future of humanity and incorporate that into our thinking and planning and economics and blah, 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 blah. Okay, sounds kind of makes sensible in principle until you start to look at how they begin to actually apply this idea. So, reading some of the works of long-term, and this is not all long-termists, but many of the most prominent long-termists began saying really strange things. Like they began talking about this idea, but well, in the long-term future, there's going to be all sorts of potential catastrophic risks. And we have to look at the probabilities of these risks. And when we look at the probabilities of these risks, what does this mean? Oh, that means that there's going to be all of these things that we need to prepare for in the long term future. So we should devote all of our attention to those things. And guess what? It turns out that one of the things that these guys think is a danger to the long term prosperity of humanity is too much democracy and also unproductive black people in Africa, for instance, who, let's not worry, maybe we shouldn't give money as humanitarian aid to and charitable work to black people because actually they're not very productive. You know, there's some
I
long
just
termists
wish
who
I
says,
wish all these people could just leave black people alone. Like if I was like that, Men in Black, Will Smith, he had that light where you could just forget people. I could just be like, forget black people exist, and they would just like not see them. Like the world would be so much better, especially for black people. But continue to feast. God, these people are just such weak, fickle racists. It always goes back to racism and insecurity. But
and it
continue.
absolutely does because so Nick Bostrom had all of these big ideas, and some of them, were about AI taking over the world, and he spoke about how we should have massive AI surveillance everywhere in order to protect humanity from catastrophes, and he spoke about all sorts of other stuff. But one of the most interesting things, and he's advocated eugenics. He talked about they call it soft eugenics, but he's written papers, academic papers, talking about the idea that there is going to be a time when we can actually manipulate IQ in utero and make choices about intelligence of future generations, which is completely not proven in real science. And by the way, when he published that paper, it wasn't in even a credible biological science journal. It was in a social science journal. And I love social science. I'm a social scientist. But if you're going to publish biology, publish in a biology journal and social science in the social science journal. And so it just shows how these people work, right? But the key point is that this guy's been advocating these ideas. And it turns out that in last year, he was outed that he had these conversations in an academic listserv 20 years ago where he endorsed the idea that black people are stupider than white people based on biological hierarchies, exactly the idea put forward by Charles Murray in the bell curve. And he spoke
Eugenics.
about this and he used the N word on an academic listserv. And this came out very recently that this was what he did. And he, shortly after lost his position at Oxford University. So you begin to realize that these long termist ideas, where they believe that there is a technological solution, and their solution is to all of this thing that in the long term future, we need to harness eugenics, harness AI, and create a kind of superhuman This is the transhumanist future they want. Create a situation where humans will merge with AI machines, and we will eventually upload ourselves into the cloud. So Nick Bostrom's brilliant scenario of the future of humanity is that in the future, all of us are going to merge with AI and machines, and essentially biology will become obsolete, and we're going to live in servers in the cloud. And also, we're going to have to, because there's going to be so many humans, there's going to be trillions of humans, right, living in servers in the cloud. We're going to have to, we're going to populate all of these solar systems across the universe, and we're going to basically have these planet-sized servers which are fueling humans living in these virtual reality kind of matrices where we're living in kind of in paradisical, it's going to be like paradise, right? And this is the desirable utopian future for humanity. So anything which prevents this future from happening is a catastrophic risk, and
Well, I
therefore,
miss you subbed out where you said anything. You right before you said anything is a catastrophic risk. What is
so
the
so
catastrophic risk?
so the catastrophic risk is anything which prevents this utopian future of trillions of humans living in cloud servers on multiple planets all across the universe. Anything which might prevent that from happening is a catastrophic risk because that would put, and the way they conceptualize this philosophically is they say if that future of trillions of human beings, that's equivalent to a genocide on a massive scale if that future doesn't take place. Therefore, if there's anything that happens in from now till then which prevents that future from happening, that's a catastrophic risk, and we are justified in taking all sorts of measures, even and Mr. Nick Bostrom has said this, if that means we have to take action today that involves the sacrifice of millions, if not billions of people today, in order to guarantee that trillions of those future virtual humans will exist tomorrow, that's justified. Think about what that means in that context. That is a justification for genocidal violence
There you
on
go.
a colossal scale against ordinary people, justified on the basis of this techno-utopian ideology. And the most scary thing is that Nick Bostrom's ideas are not fringe. He is seen as a serious philosopher. His books are best-selling books. You can go and buy them from Borders. They're not in the far right bookshop, that you don't want to, that you're ashamed to go and visit. They're there, that you can order on if you go on Amazon and look him up. He's got thousands of glowing reviews of his books. He's reviewed in all the mainstream newspapers, and yet that's what he's articulating, and his views are accepted and widely discussed in Silicon Valley. So this is the danger zone that we're in. And so what I think we need to do as citizens is really surface more understanding that these are the ideas that are animating the main people funding the Trump lobby. And they're obviously, now we can see how Elon Musk is bizarrely obsessed with the UK.
Yep.
Why are you obsessed with UK migration politics and so-called rape gangs in the UK? And you're
And
also
birth
obsessed with
rates.
Germany, and the AfD, the Nazi party there. Why is he obsessed? Because these guys see this as an existential threat, and they see it as their mission to save the planet. And that's even worse. When you're dealing with people that believe themselves to be on a messianic mission to save all of humanity, and that means sacrificing a large bulk of humanity who might well be people of color or people who are vulnerable. That's when we're getting really, really, really dangerous.
Folks, I'm talking to Nafeez Ahmed. I want to ask him a final question. For those who are asking, oh crap, this sounds great. I caught up late. Don't worry, I'll have it up later on the left hook. We're talking about, and I know a lot of this sounds batshit crazy, folks, but Elon Musk gave $300 million to essentially buy the presidency. Peter Thiel groomed J.D. Vance his entire career and hand delivered him to Donald Trump. J.D. Vance follows Curtis Yarvin. Peter Thiel follows Curtis Yarvin. Peter Thiel's Palantir, a surveillance company, surveillance, which is literally helping create America become a surveillance state, has a multi-billion-dollar contract with the United States government. It's also going international. Elon Musk, as Nafeez said, is very interested in UK politics. J.D. Vance has spent a lot of time with AfD, even though they're anti-Semitic and pro-Nazi, right? Nazi talking points, white supremacist talking points, word for word, have gone mainstream in the Republican Party. And folks, this goes back and forth. Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, I've said this before on the show, the book they always recommend people read is Camp of the Saints, a white nationalist fictional book written by a French writer that warned about, wait for it, brown immigrants who look like me and Nafeez that take over America, right? So we're seeing a cross-pollination of white supremacists, far-right, neo-Nazi, white nationalist ideas, talking points, conspiracies. You had Donald Trump in the White House repeating Elon Musk's neo-Nazi, white supremacist bullshit conspiracy of white genocide as a justification for bringing white South African farmers. QAnon, the deep state, all part of this anti-Semitic white supremacist stuff. The replacement theory that has radicalized terrorists that commit violence. That has gone mainstream in the right wing, folks, both here and abroad. And I want to remind people that Steve Bannon said that Viktor Orban of Hungary, whom they love, who has become an authoritarian leader in Orban by promoting these types of ideas against immigrants, black people, Muslims, he was Trump before Trump. But now you have the infusion of the tech bros, and that is an American supercharged steroid policy towards eugenics, the Silicon Valley tech bros. And Nafeez, my final question to you is, how is Europe in particular, and it's not just Europe, but also fascists in India and the fascist regime in Israel, looking at the United States as a model to replicate this in Europe? And we're seeing it, folks, with this really sad news. Wall Street Journal of all people wrote about it a couple of days ago, that these far right frank, anti-Semitic, racist, anti-immigrant, formerly Nazi lover, kind of still Nazi loving parties like the AfD and Le Pen's party in France and Reform UK and the Geert Wilders parties are all surging in Europe. Nafeez.
So it's absolutely it's I think what's happening is that there has been a coordinated effort to bring these networks across the Atlantic together. And that's becoming a lot more accelerated now under the new Trump administration. So I think this has been going on for more than a decade. There's been these efforts to forge these transatlantic connections and alliances between these groups, but it's now beginning to accelerate. And I think it's dangerous because what we're seeing is a deliberate effort to bring forward a much deeper plan, which does not stop at the United States. The
Mm.
United States is seen as essentially a fulcrum of power to project this ideology across the world. And they are actively looking. I mean, Steve Bannon spoke about it openly a couple of years ago, when he'd fallen out a bit with Trump. And then he was going across Europe, forging these connections and talking openly about the idea of we should have a network of these regimes which are working together and essentially speaking to this idea that this is very much an alt-Reich. It's not just about one country or one government. It's about creating a patchwork, and that's to quote Curtis Yarvin, the guru of this movement, create a patchwork of entities. And their ultimate goal is not actually to create just traditional nationalist fascist regimes of the old style. It's quite different. These guys want to get into power so they can smash national sovereign power. And in order to do what? To empower these entities like Peter Thiel's Palantir, like Elon Musk's. I don't know if you guys are watching Alien Earth at the moment. Alien
I
Earth.
was gonna go, Nafeez. So good because you know what? This whole time in my audience, I've been telling everyone, Alien Earth's the best show on TV. Yesterday's episode was one of the best episodes I've seen, but very deliberately, the showrunner. I mean, it has to be deliberate. He imagines this future. And so I was like, should I go to Nafeez with this? Will he have seen it? Ah, you made me so happy. Tell people, because he's literally showing you in a show right now, which is a fantastic show. I know he's done the research because it's too on point. Tell him what he warns about. Don't worry, we won't spoil it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, look, so that the context of what's happening there, that's no spoilers. Are the world is run by these five technological oligarchies, run by tech bro and tech cis type people, right? Who are these crazy ideologues, and they've got this particular vision, and they're competing over which kind of AI-driven technology is going to take over, is going to win. But that's the world that you're living in. In that world, and there are some hints in the story of there was a crisis, something went wrong, and then these technological oligarchies came in and they stepped in and they reshaped things, and they're running the show, and it's a for-profit kind of structure everywhere, and it's quite a frightening dystopian scenario. And I don't believe it's plausible. I think there are many reasons why this is not going to happen, but the reality is that these people are going to try to make it happen, and as they try to make that happen, then there's going to be an awful lot of destruction that's going to happen along the way. And while I don't believe that it's possible for a lot of fundamental, physical, scientific, social reasons that you can sustain something like that. But that's the vision that they want to create, and there's going to be an awful lot of chaos in the process as they try to build that. So what I think
And
we need.
also, can I also say the reason why I think, Breitbart, who was Bannon's mentor, said politics is downstream from culture. And I think it's so important for culture to call out the bad guys, right, folks? I know, look, Nafeez and I, as son of brown immigrants and Muslims, we unfortunately growing up in the 80s and 90s in the post-World War on terror, we saw how culture was weaponized to make Muslims the enemy, the brown people enemy, right? So sometimes the culture can also be used in a good way. We talked about Indiana Jones punching the Nazis. I think the fact that more and more smart filmmakers and showrunners are showing the broligarchy as the villain will help penetrate this idea that the real threat are these guys. In the show Alien Earth, real quick, the genius calls himself the prodigy. And his company's name is Prodigy. And like Nafeez said, in the future, capitalism doesn't work. So, like, things go so bad that these five corporations say, we're going to take over everything. And these five billionaires take over everything and they create a council because they're the best. And the one who runs Prodigy is known as a prodigy, and he goes by the name Boy Cavalier. He's the most obnoxious. He's like Elon Musk times 10. And it just also shows you how they don't understand pop culture, how they like misread it, just like how Peter Thiel misreads Lord of the Rings, how the fascist leader of Italy, Meloni, misreads Lord of the Rings. He misreads Peter Pan. So he's obsessed with Peter Pan and culture, and they create stuff without thinking about the consequences, right? So for them, they believe their own hype. They think they're brilliant. They're told they're brilliant. And they might be brilliant on a few things, Nafeez, but I was thinking about this earlier today. They're the stupidest people on earth on everything else when it comes to, human beings, morals, ethics, and all of that, without giving spoiler alert, is out the window for their ego and their messianic ideals, which also run parallel to eugenic genocide. But continue. So I had to say that. I had to get off my
No,
chest.
that's a really good point, and I think this leads me to get to a kind of slightly more optimistic closing point, which is that these people that we see right now, they are fundamentally actually stupid. Like they don't
Yes.
understand economics. They don't understand ecology. They don't understand actually how political and cultural systems work. They don't really understand these things. They have their ideological vision and they're pushing forward with trying to force this into across the planet. But the reality is that it's not going to work. None of the things they're doing are going to work. The tariffs are not going to work. All of these crazy things that you're doing are not actually going to work. Even these crackdowns on people everywhere, it's not actually going to work. It's going to destabilize societies. It's going to make people upset. It's going to make people angry. And so the reality is that the more these people pursue their agenda, the more destabilized it's going to get, and that's going to create an opening for us to fight back. And at the end of the day, what we're going to see is that as these people try to do things, it's like the Liz Truss effect. And I don't know if you guys in the States remember what happened with Liz Truss. She was the shortest serving prime minister in the UK, a conservative prime minister, and she famously lasted less shorter than the lifetime of a lettuce. And this is this is real, like true facts. And why? Because she didn't understand how the economy really works. And she came in and she was like, I'm going to do this and we're going to shake everything up. And she tried to go super extreme free market. And then the markets looked at her and said, you're nuts. And they went into free fall and she had to resign. And I think that's what, Nigel Farage, the AFD, all of these guys, they don't understand. Like, look at what Trump is doing to the United States in terms of energy. They're putting out these memes about coal and clean coal, and coal is going to be wonderful. And coal is actually, running out, depleting, super expensive, really, really terrible for the environment, basically rubbish. And all of the growth and the jobs and the brilliant productivity is coming from solar, wind, batteries, all these new technologies, which everywhere are scaling. China, the enemy, is steaming ahead. The economy is booming with this new tech. And then Trump is in the dark age saying, no, let's do that. Now, there's going to come a point when this stuff is going to really hit Americans, and that's going to be really tragic and devastating. But Americans are going to look at this and say, "Wait a minute, I voted for this guy, and this didn't work for me. This didn't work." So we need to be ready to be seeding these ideas now, and they might not be receptive. We're not going to get reception right now all the time, but we keep seeding these ideas. But eventually, this crisis is going to get worse, and then people will say, "What the hell did we do? This is not working. It's just getting worse and worse. This is a mistake." And that's when we can say, "Okay, we told you this was a mistake. We forgive you. Let's do something different."
Nafeez, I completely agree. Folks, pardon me for the tech glitch. I've been going nonstop. My phone was running out of battery, but I heard everything Nafeez said. I hope you did as well. We have more than 1,000 people watching, which makes me very happy because this type of nerdy stuff, people are like, whatever. But this is the story, the broligarchy. That's the enemy. That's the bad guy. That's the villain. The us versus the broligarchy is the winning message. Will anybody in the Democratic Party take it up? Will anybody in European politics take it up? This is how you bypass, in a way, the cultural fissures when it comes to racism, divide and conquer of the Southern strategy. Hey, poor whites, middle class whites, they hate you too. They're taking your money. They're stupid. They're corrupt. They're idiots. Maybe you should listen to them. But maybe people will listen to you, Nafeez. Nafeez, I'm going to bring on Danielle Moody, my fantabulous co-host, in a second. We went on a bit long, but you were on a roll. Shamelessly promote yourself.
So, if you guys want to know more about this particular track, please check out my book. It's called Alt-Reich, The Network War to Destroy the West from Within. You can get it in the States from online. Unfortunately, it's not in the bookstores because my publisher is too small. But you can order it online and it ships at a very reasonable cost. So the website is alt-reich.com. You can check it out. Just please spread the word about the book. You can follow me, nafeezahmed.net, and follow me on the usual social channels and stuff. And yeah, do feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Nafeez. Nafeez is doing this all the way from the UK, so I really appreciate you making the time. But he has written the book. He has followed this. He's been on top of it. He digs deep and finds nuggets and morsels. I'm like, Nafeez, how? He goes, it's my superpower, bro. I would have kept going, but I got Danielle Moody up, so I'm going to bring on Danielle in a minute. Folks, it's a left hook. No paywalls ever. If you can become a subscriber, please do. Also support Nafeez. I put the link to his book. It's a fantastic book. And we'll be back in 2 minutes. Thank you, Nafeez.
Thanks, Raj. Take care.
Take care, man.